Breaking news, the FBI has conducted a search of former President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate.
Easily about 100 people are here gathering right along Southern Boulevard.
Today, the indictment was this, charging Donald J. Trump.
Trump supporters traveling far and wide to stand with the former president here in Miami.
I'm an innocent man. I did nothing wrong.
In a word, unprecedented. Former President Donald Trump set to face a federal criminal trial right here in Fort Pierce.
A former president indicted, accused of keeping some of the nation's most sensitive secrets here inside Mar-a-Lago.
This is called election interference and yet another attempt to rig and steal a presidential election.
Over the course of the next hour, we will walk you through the allegations, Mr. Trump's public response to those allegations, and the likely arguments you'll hear from prosecutors and the Trump defense team.
Time and again, they were given the opportunity to return these documents.
I never thought that I would see the FBI misused or a subversion of their mission statement where they become weaponized.
We're breaking down this historic indictment and the evidence involving the former president and two alleged co-conspirators from the moment he left the White House to the day FBI agents showed up here without warning.
As a department, we were somewhat disappointed in not having that communication.
And just who are the key players responsible for handling one of the most important cases involving the nation's highest office?
Take me back to August 8th, 2022. How and when did you guys find out that there was a raid going on at Mar-a-Lago?
So on August 8th, it was pretty much a typical August. I believe it was Monday for us.
What may have started as any other day for law enforcement would quickly become anything but typical in the town of Palm Beach, Florida. Local police would soon learn that FBI agents conducted a raid at Mar-a-Lago, what many have called the Winter White House, a move unprecedented in American history, the direct effect of a dispute that started more than a year earlier, hundreds of miles away.
Is this worse than others? Is this worthy of an indictment when you weigh it against all the political shenanigans in this country over the course of its history?
Yes, it is, because in this country we take our secrets seriously. We go after individuals who misuse or misappropriate secret documents, documents that have to do with national security.
The indictment says 337 documents, all marked classified, were taken from the White House. The former president, in a post on Truth Social the day he was indicted, said, quote, "The corrupt Biden administration has informed my attorneys that I have been indicted, seemingly over the boxes hoax." According to the indictment, these were some of the nation's most coveted secrets involving national security and military capabilities of both our enemies and our allies.
The former president was ultimately indicted for allegedly mishandling those documents, and he's also accused of trying to obstruct the federal investigation using a number of tactics.
The facts of the case will be laid out before a federal jury here. Ultimately, no matter what the jury should decide, the case will have huge implications, both legally and politically. According to the indictment Donald Trump now faces, he was at his Bedminster estate in New Jersey about 6 months after leaving office, talking to a group of 4 people. You hear the former president in this taped conversation obtained by CNN.
See, as president, I could have declared. Now I can't, but this is.
Now we have a problem.
Federal prosecutors allege that conversation came 2 months after the National Archives says it requested Trump return classified documents in his possession. The indictment reads, the classified documents Trump stored in his boxes included information regarding defense and weapons capabilities of both the United States and foreign countries. United States nuclear programs, potential vulnerabilities of the United States and its allies to military attack, and plans for possible retaliation in response to a foreign attack.
Why do you think the general public should care about this case?
Well, I think the general public should care about this case because it affects all of us. Specifically with regard to our security and our safety, but also there are rules. And nobody's above the rules. Doesn't matter who you are. If the rules are in place, you have to follow the rules. There's no special exemption because you were an elected official or you were the president of the United States. These are the rules.
Former federal prosecutor David Weinstein is referring to the Presidential Records Act, which states presidential records automatically transfer into the legal custody of the archivist of the United States as soon as the president leaves office.
And Trump pretty clearly brought these documents home with him to Florida when he left Washington. And when given the opportunity to return them, because they belong to the United States, not to the president who used them, his response was no, they're mine.
Donald Trump himself, as a presidential candidate in 2016, was forceful in his views about classified documents.
We can't have someone in the Oval Office who doesn't understand the meaning of the word confidential or classified.
Here in Fort Pierce and surrounding areas, ordinary citizens, a jury of 12, will ultimately decide Donald Trump's legal fate.
What do you think of the case they're making against him, sir?
I think ever since Trump walked down the escalator 5 years ago, was almost 6 years ago, they've been after this individual ever since.
Mike and Jean Costello have lived in Fort Pierce since 1976. He's a retired surgeon. She's a retired nurse.
I think Fort Pierce is a very old town, an honest town, very down-to-earth individuals that live here, right. And they'll give you a very honest opinion about Trump.
What do you think about the case?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of ridicule of Trump. That's maybe, he does a good job.
We also chatted with Gene Ulishny. He splits his time between Fort Pierce and Parkland.
What do you think about the case?
Any of the trials that are coming up regarding Trump are attempts to keep him out of the election, in my opinion.
What do you think about the documents that he allegedly kept? A lot of it had classified information.
Yeah, so did Biden, so did Clinton.
I think he should be criticized for maybe keeping classified documents at his house, but did he really do anything with these documents?
Coming up, the former president in his own words.
Isn't it amazing? I have a big pile of papers. This thing just came up.
Discussing classified documents months after leaving the Oval Office.
And certainly you shouldn't even be talking about it. I mean, this is like the highest level of classified document.
Up next, inside the 2.5-year path from investigation to federal indictment.
Before we dive into how a grand jury investigation begins here at Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate, we have to rewind back to his final days in the White House.
Everything starts with when he first leaves office in January of 21. And as is normal, the National Archives is responsible for retention of presidential documentation.
Jason Weiser is a West Palm Beach-based attorney and former Miami-Dade assistant state attorney.
Now, certainly when you leave office, you're allowed to take some of the things with you. And it's very commonplace that the National Archives will have communications with an outgoing president about documentation that they retain.
And on January 12th of that year, staffers were photographed hauling boxes out of the White House. Of course, we don't know if these are the specific boxes investigators say they would later find. But according to the 42-count, 60-page indictment, quote, as he departed the White House, Trump caused scores of boxes, many of which contained classified documents, to be transported to the Mar-a-Lago Club in Palm Beach. The indictment later states, quote, beginning in May of 2021, the National Archives and Records Administration, NARA, which was responsible for archiving presidential records, repeatedly demanded Trump turn over presidential records that he kept after his presidency.
While months would go by on the investigative side of things, that's when prosecutors would begin focusing on what's happening behind the scenes here at the Mar-a-Lago Club. According to the indictment, between January of 2021 and August of 2022, Mar-a-Lago would host events for tens of thousands of members and guests. And according to photos scattered throughout the indictment, classified documents were found in various locations at the club, including in a ballroom, a bathroom, a shower, an office space, his bedroom, and a storage room.
It's just an exquisite place. I mean, forget Donald Trump for a second. It's an American treasure.
Lawrence Lamer is the author of Mar-a-Lago, Inside the Gates of Power at Donald Trump's presidential palace. In a state Lamer says he's been in many times. So we asked him who may have had access to these areas of the property.
Any people that work there would have access, right? It's the strangest thing. If you're going to do that, at least hide them in a good way. But he didn't even do that.
1 month after the FBI investigation began, in April of 2022, a federal grand jury investigation started, and the indictment says on May 11th, the grand jury issued a subpoena to the office of Donald J. Trump, requiring the production of all documents with classification markings.
When you receive a subpoena that has been issued through the grand jury process, the one thing that is absolute, whether you believe that the investigation is valid or not, you cannot lie, you cannot mislead, and you cannot withhold.
Nearly 1 year to the day after leaving office, according to the indictment, after months of demands by the National Archives and Records Administration for Trump to provide all missing presidential records, Trump provided only 15 boxes, which contained 197 documents with classification markings. Still, though, more documents remained missing. Ultimately, on August 8, 2022, the FBI served a court-authorized search warrant and, quote, recovered from Trump's office and a storage room at the Mar-a-Lago Club 102 more documents with classification markings. But Trump, months later, sharing this video on Truth Social.
I'm an innocent man. I did nothing wrong. And we will fight this out just like we've been fighting for 7 years.
There are 3 types of classified information involved in this case: secret, top secret, and confidential. And a classified documents expert I spoke with tells me presenting this evidence at trial will be tricky because legally, most people are not allowed to see it.
But the case I was involved in dealt with the anthrax attacks that occurred shortly after the World Trade Center.
Longtime West Palm Beach attorney Richard Schuler worked with classified information during that trial in 2003. Schuler says the use of classified information at trial presents challenges.
Every deposition that had to be taken in a soundproof room where no sound could get out. Every court reporter had to sign basically an affidavit swearing to secrecy, that they would not discuss the case, discuss any documents that they saw with anyone else.
When it comes to preparing for the jury in this case, do you think that these documents will have to be redacted, or what would that look like?
I think so. You know, I don't know how you could even give an opening statement in a case like the Trump case without referring to the very heart of the case, the documents that he kept.
According to the indictment, some of the documents stored at Mar-a-Lago included, quote, a White House intelligence briefing related to various foreign countries, quote, a document concerning military capabilities of a foreign country and the United States, a document from June of 2020, quote, concerning nuclear capabilities of a foreign country, and, quote, an undated document concerning military attacks by a foreign country. And the list goes on.
The documents Trump had similar, very sensitive information.
Very sensitive in terms of strategy, and boy, these things are, you know, you can put people's lives in jeopardy too.
Months before the FBI served a search warrant here at Mar-a-Lago, according to the indictment, they started piecing together what boxes were moved when, where, and by whom. So I asked former Miami-Dade prosecutor Jason Weiser about those allegations.
You have situations where his co-defendant, Mr. Nauta, is storing them at Mar-a-Lago.
Weiser is describing what's detailed within the indictment and seen in pictures that the former president has publicly claimed were staged by the FBI.
The sham indictment put forward by the Biden administration included staged photographs of boxes at Mar-a-Lago.
Boxes of documents stored in the club's white and gold ballroom, stacked on the stage where events often take place. And according to the indictment, in March of 2021, some of those boxes were moved to the business center. Then in April of that year, they were moved to a bathroom and shower in the club's lake room, shown in this photo. And in May of 2021, the indictment says Trump directed that a storage room on the ground floor of the Mar-a-Lago club be cleaned out so that it could be used to store his boxes. The indictment continues. The hallway leading to the storage room could be reached from multiple outside entrances, including one accessible from the Mar-a-Lago club pool.
It's got so much public entrance and egress. I mean, this is a place that they host a ton of events. I've been at events there myself. You have weddings there. You have so many people from the general public who have unbridled access to this facility.
For Weiser, what stands out is a photo taken December 7th, 2021. Trump's right-hand man, Walt Nauta, found several of Trump's boxes fallen and their contents spilled onto the floor of the storage room, including a document marked secret, containing information, quote, releasable only to the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, consisting of Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, and the United States. If federal prosecutors are going to make their case, Weiser says they're going to have to prove that more than one person was actively engaged in trying to keep these documents from the government.
So in this situation, when you're getting direction from someone to do an illegal act, i.e. move these boxes illegally in violation of the numerous acts, the Espionage Act, etc., that's going to create the conspiracy charges.
The Espionage Act is a 1917 law making it illegal to obtain or disclose information relating to national defense. The former president himself commented on it the night of his Miami arraignment when he landed back in New Jersey.
The Espionage Act has been used to go after traitors and spies. It has nothing to do with a former president legally keeping his own documents.
Fast forward to July of 2023, new charges would be brought against Nauta and a new defendant, Mar-a-Lago maintenance manager Carlos de Oliveira. As part of a superseding indictment, we learned that, quote, on Friday, June 24th, 2022, the Department of Justice emailed the attorney for Trump's business organization the final grand jury subpoena, which required the production of any and all surveillance records, videos, images, photographs, and or other CCTV from internal cameras in certain areas of Mar-a-Lago. That same day, Mar-a-Lago's IT director, who's called Trump Employee 4 in the indictment, enters the picture. The indictment says, quote, Nauta and de Oliveira contacted Trump Employee 4 asking to speak with him. And days later, according to the indictment, they told him the boss wanted the server deleted. And the indictment says the IT director allegedly responded by saying, quote, he did not believe that he would have the rights to do that. Weinstein says it's the timing here that matters because all of this allegedly happened after the subpoena was issued.
They may have intended to delete it all along, while they were conducting the investigation, but it's at that point when they know that's what's being asked for that it becomes the crime they've charged in the indictment.
And according to the indictment, in interview transcripts, both de Oliveira and Nauta also lied to investigators about having seen boxes. Our team reached out to each of the defense teams for comment on all of these allegations, and we only heard back from one of Nauta's attorneys, who said no comment. Now, instead of becoming a co-defendant, Mar-a-Lago's director of IT flipped and is now working with the prosecution.
Up next, the former president said he's not the first politician to take home classified documents.
His supporters argue others did do it.
But it's not different rules in this way.
But a former records keeper says this case is different.
The records of the president are the people's property, and they come to the National Archives at the close of the administration.
As president, the law that applies to this case is not the Espionage Act, but very simply the Presidential Records Act.
The majority of Trump's charges were brought under the Espionage Act, but he's also accused of violating the Presidential Records Act, which is a civil, not criminal statute. I spoke with Trudy Peterson, who was the acting archivist for the United States during the Clinton administration, and she shared with me what this act is and how it became a law.
anything that relates to constitutional and statutory duties, that's the language of the law, is indeed the public's property.
But Peterson says it wasn't always like that. At one point, there were no rules on presidential records. In fact, they were actually considered personal property until the Presidential Records Act was enacted in 1978.
With the resignation of Nixon, there was then a question of what was going to happen to his materials, including the famous Nixon tapes.
Peterson says this led Congress to create a study commission to determine how records of not only presidents, but also congressmen and women, senators, and the U.S. Supreme Court should be handled.
The only piece that the Congress acted on was the records of the presidents.
And Peterson says there's a clear distinction between presidential records and personal property.
The registration of the Biden's dog, that would be certainly personal, and he can take it away at the end of the administration. Or if you look at the Trump administration, the son's report cards would be, of course, personal property.
You have heard the argument. Other former presidents or vice presidents had classified documents after they left the White House. Joe Biden admittedly had classified documents stored in his Delaware garage next to his Corvette.
Never before have the two standards of justice in our country been more starkly revealed. Joe Biden had troves of classified documents from his time as vice president and even as a senator, which was completely and totally illegal.
Historian Charles Zeldin sees a big difference, though.
When it was pointed out that they had these documents, their response, Pence and Biden, was, "Oh my, we should return them to you immediately. We did not mean to be having them. We should not be keeping them. They belong to the people of the United States. They belong to the government." Trump, when given that opportunity to go, "Oh my, I didn't realize I brought these home with me. I should return them to the government," chose to obstruct, to basically say, "These are my documents."
But here is a counter-argument, as defense lawyer Stuart Kaplan sees it, possibly one the jury might hear.
Because at the end of the day, there's not one scintilla of any evidence, not a shred of evidence that this government will be able to bring in and suggest to you that Donald Trump had an ulterior motive to maybe leverage this information for a foreign state or for some reward or for some money.
Coming up, even more documents discovered when the FBI raids Mar-a-Lago.
There was, concern that, perhaps that we had been, part of the search warrant process or not, and, that wasn't the case.
And it all leads up to one historic day in Miami.
I think it's a rigged deal here. We have a rigged country. We have a country that's corrupt.
August 8th, 2022. South Ocean Boulevard here in Palm Beach filled with FBI agents that day, and increasingly the curious who would gather.
Yeah, and when news broke of the FBI search, hundreds of the former president's supporters would soon gather right here.
The whole day had gone by. Apparently, the search warrant had been conducted at some point earlier in the day, but the Palm Beach Police Department didn't find out about it until the media.
Captain Will Rothrock says that's when Palm Beach police responded to the area.
We responded pretty quick because, it's right here in town, and we have a pretty, fast response time. There hadn't been any crowds that had gathered by the time we first responded, but within about an hour or two, I think we had about 500 demonstrators on the Southern Boulevard Causeway area in response to the search warrant that had been executed earlier that day.
By nightfall, they lined the Southern Boulevard approaches to Mar-a-Lago.
They should not be doing this. This is a disgrace.
Completely appropriate. But here you see hundreds of supporters. Look at the flags out here as we pan up. You see Trump supporters gathered up and down the causeway.
Their presence, an exclamation point for the emotions framing the first ever raid of a former president's home and the first ever federal indictment that would follow. In a Truth Social post days later, the former president wrote, quote, "There is no way to justify the unannounced raid of Mar-a-Lago, the home of the 45th president of the United States."
That day and night at Mar-a-Lago fast-forwarded to the day that unfolded in Miami 10 months later, just this past June. A city that's seen far more than its share of high-profile cases had never seen anything like this.
Who's in that one?
There is no comparison to that hot, steamy June 13th day in Miami. Donald Trump, a former president, appearing as no predecessor ever had in a federal courtroom to face criminal charges.
He kind of went back and forth from folding his arms and sitting back, just sort of leaning over the table.
In that courtroom, a plea of not guilty.
It's all political.
And outside the court,
It's all ridiculous. There's no merit to it.
It is entirely possible that this is showing that our judicial system is actually going to hold people accountable equally.
you were looking on at a picture at Versailles Restaurant, a famous gathering spot on Southwest 8th Street.
Thank you, everybody.
Mr. Trump left first for a stop at the famed Versailles Restaurant in Little Havana.
We have a country that is in decline like never before, and we can't let it happen.
Then to his airplane bound for his summer home at Bedminster, New Jersey, where he addressed supporters.
Today we witness the most evil and heinous abuse of power in the history of our country.
Historic drama unfolding with an entire nation as witnesses.
Very sad thing to watch. A corrupt sitting president had his top political opponent arrested on fake and fabricated charges of which he and numerous other presidents would be guilty, right in the middle of a presidential election in which he is losing very badly.
President Biden and Democrats said prosecutors acted independently. The legal and political drama, charges and countercharges reaching the latest fever pitch.
So the question goes, how does this case land here?
Before Judge Eileen Cannon in her Fort Pierce federal courtroom.
It's not such a great surprise that it ended up in the northern part of the district. Mar-a-Lago is in the northern part of the district. That's where all the alleged criminal activity took place.
Former federal prosecutor David Weinstein stresses Judge Cannon was picked at random from a pool of 4 federal judges in the West Palm, Fort Pierce area.
I know that many people think that somebody had their finger on the wheel and it was intended to go there, but look, the clerk of court is someone who's selected by the district court judges, and we have to again trust that the blind wheel is the blind wheel, and that's just simply the way that it's spun.
Here was an Associated Press headline from September. Florida jury pool could give Trump an advantage in classified documents case. Jurors will be picked from 5 counties, the story noted: St. Lucie, Martin, Indian River, Okeechobee, and Highlands. Trump won all of them in 2020.
But ultimately, that jury will be picked. That jury will render a verdict. That verdict will either be guilty, not guilty, or it will be hung. And that is just how the system works. If someone undermines that by saying it can't be done in this case, then they've undermined the whole system.
Others are not so sure. How in Fort Pierce or anywhere else, they ask, do you find a person, much less a jury of 12 plus alternates, who does not have an opinion about Donald Trump?
Do you think it will be difficult to seat an impartial jury because of who he is?
I think it'll be incredibly difficult to seat an impartial jury. I don't think there's anyone in this state, in this country, in the world who doesn't have a preconceived notion about whether or not they like the former president.
It is almost impossible to ensure that while someone you think is going to be fair and impartial, are they in some way just more interested in getting on the jury to say, I sat on the Donald Trump Mar-a-Lago prosecution case? And that's the thing that we always are worried about.
But historian and political expert Dr. Charles Zeldin is hopeful.
So you're optimistic that the former president can get a fair trial in a place like Fort Pierce and elsewhere?
Yes, I think he can. I think he'll get jurors who take it seriously.
Zeldin's worry is about a court of public opinion that may drown out what happens in a court of law.
That's the part that worries me, that we get so angry and so frustrated and so convinced that we know what the answer is before the court has even ruled, that we won't accept the answer that the court comes to, even if you don't like it.
Presiding over one of the most closely watched cases in history, Judge Eileen Cannon will be front and center on the federal bench.
Much of the attention in this historic case will be on the key legal players as it unfolds in Fort Pierce. That includes special counsel Jack Smith, who was appointed by U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland. He's a former war crimes prosecutor, a Harvard Law School graduate, and he's not registered with any political party. Donald Trump's lead counsel is Todd Blanche, a white-collar criminal defense lawyer and former New York federal prosecutor, who's represented Trump's associates as well. He graduated from American University.
Then there's Judge Eileen Cannon. Born in Columbia and raised in Miami, she attended the University of Michigan Law School, is a former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Florida, and worked on cases ranging from firearms and narcotics to fraud and immigration offenses.
In 1960, my maternal grandparents, my live and bus, were forced to leave everything they had worked so hard to build in Cuba, to build a life here in the United States. They taught me always to be thankful for this country and to cherish our constitutional democracy.
Judge Eileen Cannon shared her personal story back in 2020. Appointed by then-President Donald Trump, Cannon's Senate confirmation would come in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. Her testimony, shared through Zoom, the initial steps in her journey, one so familiar with families all across South Florida.
To my loving mother, Mercedes Cuevas, who at the age of 7 had to flee the repressive Castro regime in search of freedom and security. Thank you for teaching me about the blessing that is this country and the importance of securing the rule of law for generations to come.
Judge Cannon's confirmation hearing in the Senate would end in 56 votes, landing her on the federal bench. And just a few years later, firmly at the center of one of the most scrutinized cases in American history.
Judge Cannon has already faced legal controversy. The conservative 11th Circuit Court of Federal Appeals in Atlanta said Judge Cannon was wrong when she appointed a special master to review Mar-a-Lago classified documents, essentially stopping the prosecution review of the material. In dismissing her ruling, the 11th Circuit wrote in part, "It is indeed extraordinary for a warrant to be executed at the home of a former president, but not in a way that affects our legal analysis or otherwise gives the judiciary license to interfere in an ongoing investigation. To create a special exception here would defy our nation's founding principle that our law applies to all without regard to numbers, wealth, or rank."
Well, I think she's qualified because she was selected to be a judge. She went to law school and she worked as an assistant U.S. attorney for a number of years. So she's obviously qualified.
Longtime Fort Pierce area attorney Jeffrey Garland defends Judge Cannon's qualifications, even as he appeals one of her rulings in a case he had before her.
The verdict form as presented did not have guilty or not guilty. It had yes and no.
It had yes and no?
Yes.
How unusual to you was that?
It was unusual enough that I objected on the basis that it wasn't the customary form, the traditional layout of a verdict in a criminal case is guilty or not guilty.
Garland's client had been accused of tossing a chair in federal court in a separate case, charged with assaulting a federal officer.
In cases back in more than 20 years ago, the 11th Circuit ruled that there first had to be a verdict of guilty or not guilty in the traditional fashion. Then, after that's been done, which is the requirement of the Constitution, then the jury could make a yes or no determination of certain aggravating circumstances. For example, did the person brandish a firearm?
Garland's client is in prison. The appeal is pending.
Is this a rookie mistake by a judge?
I do not know if it's a rookie mistake, but I consider it to be a breach of the Constitution because the federal judge doesn't have the constitutional power to find someone guilty. The things you're focusing in on is the number of years of experience. You have experienced people who can make bad decisions, and you have people who are deemed inexperienced who make good decisions.
And now Judge Cannon prepares in matters of experience and temperament to face unparalleled scrutiny in her Fort Pierce courtroom.
How to prepare for a case unlike any other.
Based on your reading of the indictment, is it a straightforward case for the prosecution?
It's not a straightforward case.
I think this case is absolutely airtight.
Coming up, inside the arguments likely to be laid out by both sides.
So what are the most forceful arguments jurors may hear in this courtroom? I asked former FBI agent and criminal defense lawyer Stuart Kaplan. First, a focus on the prosecution. As you're talking to 12 ordinary citizens, when you laser focus on that final message to them as a prosecutor, it would be,
no person, even a president of the United States, is above the law.
Stuart Kaplan is a former FBI agent, now a criminal defense lawyer. He says prosecutors will hammer away at Donald Trump's alleged efforts to obstruct justice, to ignore a grand jury subpoena.
What is alleged in the indictment is that when he received these subpoenas requesting the retrieval of these documents, his lawyer, what I call is the fudge factor. They stonewalled, they obstructed, they compounded what appears to be Donald Trump's efforts to withhold these classified documents.
Trump is on record saying he had declassified the documents as president. Here's what he said to Fox News host Sean Hannity in September 2022. Quote, "There doesn't have to be a process, as I understand it. You know, there's different people say different things, but as I understand it, there doesn't have to be. You're the president of the United States. You can declassify just by saying it's declassified, even by thinking about it."
And let's even assume he went through the proper protocols to declassify documents. It does not give him the right to obstruct or impede a grand jury investigation. And that's where, as a criminal defense attorney, I would have some serious worry. And as a government prosecutor, I would feel very comfortable and confident in going in on that side of my case.
In a Fort Pierce federal courtroom, here is what Kaplan says you might expect to hear from Donald Trump's lawyers.
And let there be no doubt, you have seen and heard, and you will hear that the President of the United States, the 46th President of the United States sitting in office right now, Joe Biden, has had classified documents for the last 40 years in his garage or in multiple locations. And ladies and gentlemen, this is nothing more than a selective prosecution. This is nothing more than a political ploy to keep Donald Trump from becoming the 47th President of the United States.
I asked Kaplan about arguments versus evidence. Both sides will fight over which is which.
So the great thing about opening and closing, and the judge will tell the jury, is that opening arguments and closing arguments are not evidence. And so you can get up and kind of push that agenda. Now, it probably...
You would expect the argument you just made by the defense.
There's no question about it.
I would make sure that they understood what his belief is. And that's what he's been really clear about saying, that he said, I could not only declassify them, that his belief is that under the Presidential Records Act, he had the right to retain these documents.
Mark Schnapp is a former Miami federal prosecutor and a longtime defense attorney.
He can make the argument that he relied on his counsel as to what his duties were, and that's why he acted the way he did. And he believed he was in full compliance with his requirements under the law.
And Kaplan says expect Trump's defense team to blame poor legal advice.
Whatever the lawyers at the time did or whatever they told the government, that's because of their own malfeasance or whatever their agenda was. That's not because of what Donald Trump told them they were to do.
I think his best defense at this point is to try to win the 2024 election and either pardon himself or order that the Justice Department simply stop the prosecution.
A presidential race and an uncertain road ahead, the obstacles that remain as a trial date inches closer. As of this taping, the trial is scheduled to begin in the spring of 2024. But lawyers we spoke with think the chances of it starting by then are slim for a multitude of reasons.
I think it's going to get continued. It's not unusual, and especially because of the volume of documentation in this case, I think it's going to be very difficult.
A theory attorney and Palm Beach State College professor Jeff Van Treese shares.
The trial date that was set in May is not set in stone. Trial dates get moved all the time.
Van Tree says the fact that the former president is facing other indictments in multiple states could pose scheduling issues.
I think that in all likelihood, this will not be the first case that goes to trial for Trump. I think that this case will probably go to trial after the election.
Can Trump run for the presidency while indicted? Most legal opinion seems to say yes. Can he serve if convicted? There is no specific constitutional ban on that, though some Trump opponents say the 14th Amendment's disqualification clause could come into play. It's complicated. So what to make of this intersection, this collision between law and politics?
We are the political system.
Well,
we the people.
We the people. We make the choices. And ultimately, we will decide as a collective whether the actions that Trump has taken that are proposed to be illegal and for which there are multiple indictments, that if he is found guilty of those, or even if they're still pending, does that matter to us? And if you look at the polls, there's about 40% of people who say it doesn't matter, Trump is our man. There's about 40% of the people who say it doesn't matter, Trump is guilty, we'll never vote for Trump even if he's found innocent. And in the middle, there's that 20% that'll make the decision.
Mar-a-Lago, so long a symbol of wealth, power, and privilege for Donald Trump.
You know, I hate to see a former president of the United States have to go through all this. It's not politics, in my opinion. It's what the law is, and nobody is above the law. Very important.
Classified documents and the decisions of ordinary citizens seated as a jury, all set to come together in historic fashion.
You know, normally with this much evidence would be pled out, but the reason it's not because of the merits of the case, it's because he's trying to run out the clock.
The nation watches to see whether Trump will face a conviction in Fort Pierce.
I'm not the one who thinks I'm above the law. I'm the one that followed the law.
I never thought that I would see the FBI misused or a subversion of their mission statement where they become weaponized to target and go after, whether it's Donald J. Trump, because at the top there was an effort to silence him.
The law, politics, and passions testing America as never before.
I think we need to accept the fact, or have faith, that the legal system has strength, that it can hold up to the stresses being put upon it and come up with a just result. It may not be a result you like, but a just result because the accused had their day in court.
And we'll be right here covering the Donald Trump classified documents case every step of the way.
We appreciate you joining us.